I'd like to welcome you to this public meeting of the New York City Rent Guidelines Board. I will now take roll call. Please respond if present. Shayla Garcia, Leah Goodridge, Cecilia Hossa, present. Alex Schwartz, present. Patty Stone, present. Erman Tejeda, present. Scott Walsh,
present.
May Yu, David Reese, present. Let the record show that we have a quorum.
Just that your mics aren't on. I didn't put them on yet, so when you're ready to speak, you just push the button on the bottom. Yeah.
So I expect that today we're going to have a relatively brief, it may be a brief meeting. It's really kind of a planning meeting for next year. But I'm also hoping that we have some fruitful conversations as well. We have 3 things on the agenda. The first is our meeting and hearing schedule for next week. Andrew prepared a draft meeting schedule, which you can find in your folders. I think it's worth talking about it for a few minutes because I think the schedule is pretty important. We're always balancing when to meet with when the data is available so that Andrew and the staff can prepare their reports. So Andrew's draft schedule both proposes a series of dates that take into account holidays and also indicates which report we'll cover. And also gives some rationale as to why we're covering that report then. It's usually based on when the relevant data is available to the staff. And so that, there was some discussion last year about why are we meeting when we're meeting, why are things so condensed, and this is to give a little bit of context to that. We certainly can play around with the schedule, and I'm happy to. I'm also happy to schedule additional meetings. There was discussion last year amongst the members that we should have time to kind of just process the reports that we've received. So if people are interested in that, that would be great to hear, and then Andrew and I will just build that into the schedule. We could build it in as a tentative meeting that we don't necessarily have to have, but if members feel like we need more time to deliberate, we'll certainly make that available, and it's just good to get that on the agenda now. So just in terms of feedback, anybody want more meetings, kind of off the bat, kind of just open meetings where we have an opportunity to deliberate without hearing from the staff? Or we don't need to answer that now, but just to hear from people.
I do think we need, because we do the income and affordability study very early, and then or the income and expense study, the beginning of March, and then we pause a month and do the PIOC. I think we need a little bit of putting those two back together.
In early May.
After that, I think that's probably the session for me. I mean, I think we all have some doubts about the mortgage survey just because of the limitations of what it can and can't cover. So I don't know that there is any deep dive into that. But those two pieces get presented in very different time frames, but ultimately need to come together. And I think that does perhaps warrant maybe not a 3-hour meeting, but at least an hour conversation after people have digested both of them on a separate date.
And so just because I didn't fully process, when would be the right?
I don't know if it's kind of April 10th or April a week later.
I don't know if you saw, but I printed out the calendar for March, April, May, and June.
The holidays are on the bottom.
And I know it's rather
so
small.
not in Passover, but obviously whatever data the 17th on would to me seem like the 17th is a Friday, so maybe the week of the 20th. Do we meet again the week of the 20th? We don't. That's the preliminary vote.
Yeah, that we generally have the preliminary vote during that time.
Locked in that we have the preliminary vote, and we haven't talked about those two things together.
So we'd want to do it, well in advance of the preliminary. We don't want to do it right before the preliminary vote, right? That just seems maybe too close.
Is the Andrew, based on when you get the data, is the PIOC locked on April 9th, or could it be 5 days sooner so that April 9th could become a joint meeting to discuss the two together?
Right. The PIOC goes from April to March, so we still get data at the end of March.
So
and then turning around and getting the report out is the issue. So to have it earlier than the 9th, it gets tricky. We can. Do you need, when you say digest the report, do you want to take the report and have some time with it and then come back? Or can I present the price index that day and then we sort of tie it up? Because the price index should be hopefully a standalone report. The rest of the meeting could simply be a discussion about tying all that stuff in together. Because you do get the report prior to the meeting.
Yeah, I think as long as it's issued like 3 days before, and I think when it's issued the day, you don't usually issue the day before, but when it's issued the day before, it can be a little tight.
Little tough,
To digest it, compare it to what we've read from March 5th, and then put it all back together. So I'm okay with an extended meeting on the 9th, if others are, but.
That makes sense.
That makes sense. That's fine. We can certainly do that.
Other thoughts?
That Passover period between April 9th, it starts the evening of April 9th. Is there any concern about that? I just want to make sure that we're good. The rest of then it's the 16th is the last day.
So does anyone have plans for that morning? If you know that far in advance, I guess is the question.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Okay. All right. So let's stick with this as the draft calendar. If people come back and say we need more time for deliberation, we can come back to that question, and that's fine. Okay, so that's our first item. Our second item is about research agenda and additional data requests. And let me tell you why I put this on the agenda, and I don't think it's a surprise to anyone. I think in a lot of our conversations, both in the board or if we're having one-on-one conversations, people have said, I wish I knew about this, or I wish we had data about this. And so I want to have the opportunity now for us to kind of brainstorm, is there additional types of data or reports that we might like to have that we can give enough lead time to the staff that they can start to look into it. And I will just tell you that Andrew and I have begun to meet with other entities to try to kind of figure out, is there data out there, or are there ways of looking at the data that we as an entity have not yet done? So we met with Liz Gormer, who you all know from her HBD testimony. She's testified or been present at testimony for a number of years now. She has brought us some fruitful ideas about additional data that HBD has that we may be able to access and use. So that's a start. Andrew and I are going to continue to meet with other stakeholders, city agencies, and perhaps some think tanks, and start to just have the conversation. Is there data out there that we don't have, that we have not yet analyzed, but is relevant to the work that we have for the board? And then let me tell you a kind of another, this is a personal view, but I'm guessing shared by some other members of the board. Just because of the change in the rent laws, I think we want to kind of develop like a dashboard of kind of early warning signs if there's any significant changes as a result of the changes in the laws. So I guess the second question is, what might that dashboard contain? What are people concerned about that we want to kind of have a particular focus to? And do we, even think about kind of putting together a literal dashboard of indicators that are most important to us? So with that as my introduction, I guess the question to you all is, what are the types of questions that you were presented, that you found yourself asking, that you didn't feel like you got complete answers to, because we didn't have the data that would answer your question? And I'd like to kind of put those on the table so that Andrew, he could either respond now, or he doesn't need to respond now, but kind of can come back and report to us as to whether it's realistic for the staff to answer those questions.
Okay, I think one of the things that we might want to look into in the future is the vacancy factor and how many apartments are being maintained as vacant. I'm not sure how you're going to be able to get it for this year, because you're not going to be able to use registrations since they're not due till the end of July, even though they represent April 1st. And the 2019 are not going to help us because the laws were issued after. So I'd like to know if there's a way for us to, other than using DHCR's registrations, to see how many owners are keeping apartments vacant based on the new laws, and if there's a way for us to find out if owners have I think it might be too early, but if owners have stopped making improvements to the building, MCIs, based on the changes to the law. So, I mean, I think that's going to play out over time, but I think that that's an important factor for us to look into.
So improvements to the vacant units or all units?
Well, the vacant units are either improved already or they're not, and whether they're renting them, I mean improvements to the building, new roofs, new boilers, as opposed to just making repairs and not putting new items in.
And this may be just too basic of a question, but all of that stuff will be reflected in HCR data, but that's going to be with a big lag. Do you have any sense of where we could find more more current?
On the capital side, people would pull permits to do any of the type of capital work that you're talking about. So in theory, DOB could give us time series data for rent stabilized geotags and say how many permits were pulled for roofs, were pulled for new boilers on certain time intervals, and we could hopefully then see if there is change in the data that's notable.
From the year before or 2 years before.
Yeah.
And have we worked with that kind of DOB data before?
We have not.
Okay.
We generally just get permit data. We don't get specific to what they're doing.
I mean, DHCR can tell us how many MCIs are being filed.
Yes,
as opposed to in
oh
the
yeah,
past.
no, we can get that. That shouldn't be a problem.
But that's going to be a leg because you have 2 years from the date you do the improvement to file the application. So that's also going to be a leg.
So I think Scott's point is particularly interesting because it would be like if you looked at not at general, like not at all permits, but if you looked at things like boiler permits, you're talking about building system, like you.
Windows, things.
So what are the other major categories of permits that DOB has as separated out permits that?
I'm not sure that it's going to be easy for them to separate that out.
But like, don't you think they would have boiler permits as like a separate category?
But is boiler permit that could be a repair to the boiler as well?
But actually, true, but if there's a big drop-off,
Well,
it would be.
repairs have to be made, repairs are going to be made, it's whether owners are going to be investing in putting new things into the building.
But I think we have to understand how the permitting works.
But if I think what David says, right, that if repairs are going to be made no matter what, that means repairs will be made prior to the change in the law, and repairs are going to be, so that'll be constant. So what you're looking for is the drop-off of the new. So if there was, 100,000 repairs that previous year, and there will be 100,000 repairs this year, but if there was 120,000 permits of before, and then all of a sudden just 100,000 repairs, there's your drop-off. If that's what you, if that's what.
But at least it's a good question to ask.
Yeah.
So that's worth, I guess, seeing if DOB can help us with that.
So you have historical of how many, you can find out historically how many permits were done for MCIs or how about individual stuff that's not, just, I'd like to see the effect of that in the past too, as far, because we're always looking at, okay, this was what the increase was that year, this was the increase, and I have a point that, well, there's a lot of increases based on other things that we never accounted for. Those are real dollars for people, right? And I'd like to see that information. I kept asking for it before, and that's what I'd like to know.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to differentiate between the jobs that may be covered by MCIs, because we won't have the data. We have to. I don't know if we're making assumptions that if you're putting in a new boiler, you're getting for the MCI, and then we'd have to discern what's on that what can be an MCI and what can't be. I mean, there's a list of what owners can. At which HCR does produce. So I mean, I don't know. That may be tricky, but we could try.
I know what you have an idea what I'm trying to.
Yeah, but Armand, I'm trying to remember from last year. I recollect, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you were trying to determine kind of historical trends of MCIs generally, historical trends of IAIs generally, and kind of impacts on individual unit holders.
Yeah, because if anything, I didn't go to many of the public. I went to only two of them. That was kind of a theme. That was if you kind of got the impact of what people were saying. So for us not to look at it, then why are we having the public hearings for people? That's what they're clamoring. That's what they're complained about over and over and over and over again. And we're not looking at what they're saying. What they're saying is one of their pains.
I'm sorry, so what they're saying was owners were spending too much money renovating apartments?
No, that in many cases, there were renovations of apartments that weren't renovations of apartments, and they were getting the increases based on that. I remember one specific story from a gentleman, they were supposed to, they're going to fix something, and then all of a sudden he signed this piece of paper, and boom, and there was this huge increase on his rent. So yes, there are some owners who are investing, and God bless them, right? But then there were many other abuses as well. That's what I kept hearing over and over again.
Although what I recollect, in addition to what you just said, what I recollect you making a point about last year was that saying that someone gets whatever the rent adjustment that we vote on, that there was a significant number of people paying significant MCIs as an additional add-on to that. Do we have that answer to that question as to kind of what the distribution curve of MCIs are on tenants? Like, you know, what's the average and what are the worst? And
No, we can't, because MCIs are based on not only how much money the owner put in, but how much the tenant's rent was at the time the application was filed. So owners are precluded from increasing, no matter how much the MCI increases, they can only collect 6% per year, so there's a max that they can increase the rent.
But would and I don't know, but does the HCR data reflect the portion that the tenant pays that is from MCI? Is that broken down?
What the HCR data shows is when the owner registers, they indicate whether or not, what they're taking the increase for. So if they're giving an increase, they may just simply say the renewal lease, our guideline, but they can also mark MCI or IAI for reasons that the rent are going up. It doesn't put a specific dollar amount to those. So you sort of, I guess you'd have to do some teasing out to say, okay, if the rent is $1,000 and we gave, a 1.5% increase, so that's $15 for this increase is based on our renewal, then if they indicating MCI increase is the other part of it, we can maybe figure out, okay, that's the amount they paid, that the rent went up due to the MCI, but we'd have to try to massage that data and do it, and how accurate that would be, I guess, is the question.
I guess it's worth evaluating whether we can do it, maybe, as a start, just to see what we can tease from the data.
Yeah, I'm not quite clear, given the new rent laws, where MCIs are capped, is it fit one? Yeah, so, it may be historically of interest, but going forward, it's not, and also with the elimination of decontrol, deregulation, which MCI was a mechanism to achieve that. I think it may be interesting historically, but going forward, I'm not sure how critical it is, since these are capped much more severely than before.
Right, the IAIs are capped now. You can't, if you spend more than $15,000, it's a mistake because you're not going to get any credit for it.
And the maximum that a tenant will pay for a maxed out IAI would be how much in a month?
I think it was, I don't remember, 80-something or 90-something, depending on how many apartments are in the building. I don't remember the exact.
$80 or $90?
Yeah.
Per month, per unit?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
When you're talking about the future, but if I'm a tenant that's affected, and then you don't kind of count what's happened to me in the past. You're basing increases on the fact that, hold it, you haven't, a lot of what you've done is not taking this into account. So if I'm that tenant now, and this is not just one person, and my increases have gone so much, and then I'll say, oh well, we're not counting that anymore, but I'm still dealing with that, with those increases. So anything you're doing in the future, take into account what's happened to me in the past.
You have to have this in the context. We don't have means-tested housing. So, there's people who have these deals who could afford something greater, and there's people who could afford something less. We don't have means-tested housing.
Just asking to look at the information, that's all.
So we'll see if we can tease anything out.
Mm-hmm.
I know you had some thoughts, Alex, too.
Yeah, one thing more on this. There's been, as I understand, a fair amount of litigation about overcharges related to MCIs. I was reading in newspapers and apartment improvements. I don't know if any of that information, which is public record, is something that we could use to at least to get some sense of the degree to which it's been abused.
So I'm just thinking it through. So a kind of a review of the cases that have been brought.
Yeah.
To kind of give us not a quantitative sense, but give us a qualitative
Yeah.
sense.
Of increases like
Of where landlords have been, where tenants have convinced judges that landlords were claiming MCIs when actually the money wasn't being spent on it.
So to give us some indication
Of
of
the
the extent of which
yeah.
people are some people, or
Yeah.
some of the worst-case scenarios, I guess.
I don't think there's any relevance so that this board has the,
It,
I don't see what the relevance is if there's a bad landlord out there that overcharged somebody or miscalculated or whatever that person did, and there was a case and the judge decided the case. How does that affect anything in here?
thinking more about the prevalence of such cases.
It's not a
But-
prevalence if you think
yeah.
about how many tenants are out there and how many, there's just not.
Okay.
But I don't see the relevance, and I
Okay.
also don't see the expertise on this board to be judging whether an owner did or did not do something correctly. I don't see that. I don't see that this board has that expertise.
Okay. Anyway, let me move on to, I did have, this is something I just came up with, but one thing that strikes me could be done is to get more information on per unit sales prices for rent-stabilized housing so basically linking the Department of Finance data on transactions, which I've seen is done, and I think we already do it, but at a building level. But think about per unit, what the sales price has been over time. And you could also break it down by 100% rent-stabilized buildings, partially rent-stabilized buildings with commercial space, and those without. And in particularly now, where there's, you see in the press, they're saying 30% decreases in the sales price of rent-stabilized housing. But I think it'd be important to track this, and I think that the data already exists. It's just about how it's managed and, and merged.
Yeah, I think we did a memo putting it, we didn't take the building, and normally we do it on a building basis, but I think we did a follow-up with what it was on a unit
On a per unit
basis. But we didn't take a look at, okay, so this building has, 80% stabilized, so are these units selling for less per, building per unit than the others? I mean, I'm not sure we can get to that specifically, but we could certainly present the
But-
sales data by unit.
I think tracking this historically would be useful to see if there have been changes in the sales price of rent-stabilized housing.
And just to play it out, Alex, and then that would impact our decision-making. What would be some of the ways that it would impact our decision-making?
It would just be a measure, for example, if people are saying, NOI is decreasing and property, that the economics of the rent-stabilized housing is diminishing, you would think you would see that in a lower sales price, all else equal. And if sales prices are constant or increasing despite changes in NOI, it's another data item to consider, I think.
I think that's another thing that'll happen over time, because sales for buildings will drop.
And they have, haven't they?
They already
There have been no
have,
transactions
and they will
this year.
continue
But,
to
yeah.
drop. So that is.
But I just think it should be monitored and tracked, and I think the data already exists, it's just about how it's coordinated.
And it may rely, so Scott was saying earlier that the mortgage report, many of us have had concerns about the mortgage report, and if sales prices are going down, that's going to impact loans at the end of the term of the new mortgage, and there's going to be some interplay there, I guess, as well. Speaking of the mortgage, oh, sorry, Alex, did you have more?
Yeah, there are a couple other things. One thing which I think would be interesting to see, I don't know if it's possible to get the data, is if it's possible to get a sense of the distribution of rent-stabilized housing by the type and size of the landlord. How many are owned by individuals, corporations, to what degree are properties part of a large portfolio or individual building? Just to get a sense of that, I think would be useful. And I don't think we really have that. And I've seen in some studies that refer to, large concentrations of rent-stabilized housing under single ownership, and it has implications in terms of resources that might be potentially available, and I don't think we have that information.
And do we have any sense, Andrew, if that data kind of exists? I think it's hard to come by data, right?
Yeah, I don't know how you
I don't think there's a really physical way to call LLCs together. I mean, you could make it some kind of educated guess at it, but
Yeah, that's
it's
so,
such a forensic.
the one of the issues, yeah, they're all registered as LLCs, so, but we could try, we could try to see what we can get at. If there's another data point we can use.
Wasn't someone saying, I forget who said this to us, but something about looking at the phone number of the contact for each building? And
That's an
like,
option.
Yeah, like, because that could be a managing agent, but still, if, that tells you something about the concentration, at least of the
Right.
management, if not of the, not of the ownership.
I think that way you're gonna get much more information on the management and not the ownership.
Right.
Because the contact number is always the managing agent.
Right.
Not the owner.
Lots of small owners can use managing agents.
Unless
so
they're a
it'll
very
tip
small
you.
owner.
Right, but even that's better than nothing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, if you-
what creative data sources we could look at to see how concentrated ownership of real property is? And maybe we ask the RSA and CHIPS and ask them if they're willing to share any information about their members. I mean, they may or may not. Alex, did you have more?
That was the only other thing, was just, I agree that we need to have sort of more real-time indicators of these issues, especially things like NOI, if it's possible, or, the expenses and so on.
So Leah, we're just brainstorming of like questions we had in previous years that we were frustrated that we didn't get as good of an answer to as we would have liked. And so everyone's been kind of just putting their individual issues on the table. I don't know if you have any, and Cecilia, I don't know if there's any pet issues that you're like, I wish I knew this, it would help me make a better decision.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on, I heard a little bit about the conversation about small owners. I do think that if we're not able to get data, even from the RSA, that we should limit our consideration about that, because we often use that as a factor in some of the determinations. And so if we actually don't have data to back up what we're saying, even if we could get it, then we're basing our decisions on imaginary or things that at least we can't back up. So that's something that comes up consistently, small owners being impacted if there were to be a rent freeze or a rent rollback. But we don't actually, if we don't have the data there and we're only, relying on a few people testifying to it, I think it makes it a lot difficult to heavily rely on it. So if the RSA can provide it, or, if we can actually do a comprehensive, if we can gather data on that, that would be actually very helpful.
So kind of something that I keep coming back to for the last few years, for those who've served with me for the last few years, know that I get so frustrated when we don't have a sense of the how we don't take into account financing in our understanding of how much net operating income is left over after financing costs. We just have it's kind of like there's the black box of the balance sheet of a building, and we don't really know after operating expenses, after financing costs, what's left over. And so last year, I personally found it really helpful when Rafael Sestero spoke about the underwriting for their portfolios. And so one thing that I've asked Andrew to do is that he said there's someone from a large New York multifamily lender who may be able to come and talk about underwriting of buildings to kind of give us, the broader contours of how buildings are underwritten and kind of where the money's coming in, get distributed. And we may be even able to get some people from HBD to come and kind of talk about how they look at buildings, and they look at the buildings that come through HBD through one program or another. So that's not really a data thing, but it's kind of more of like modeling what buildings' inflows and outflows look like. So that's something that I'm going to kind of work on as well. Other thoughts?
Something else that comes up often, you mentioned expenses when we talk about the NOI. there's no, in terms of profits, the profits that landlords are making, I think we should have a conversation about that, because that's a big factor also into our decisions. And when we're talking about the NOI, even though expenses are already taken out, I know that some folks are hesitant to say, like, this is what some profits are. So I'd like to have a conversation about that.
So just, I'm going to just push you for more kind of detail. So what could the staff provide us so we have a more informed conversation? Or what kind of questions could we ask them to answer that we could have a more informed conversation?
So if we're going to be extensive and, for example, ask external organizations or ask the city to provide information on even just how, small landlords, then I think it's fair to also include in that to see how much profits landlords are specifically making. So whether it's data that's provided through the city or whether it's through external organizations, I think it's something that we should include. Because when we look at the NOI, we're not looking at that as profits, right? And so what kind of data do we need to be able to make a determination to say, on average, like this is the average amount of profits that landlords are making?
All right, so maybe, when we continue our conversations with HPD, we can maybe ask some of those questions.
Yeah, I'm not sure how, I'd have to put a lot of thought into how we tease out profit from NOI, but we could take a look.
I mean, we don't know what their tax situation is.
This is my.
But when we're looking at the costs, those are projected and those are not the actual costs, right? And so I think.
Well, the I&E, it's the actual cost.
But for the
price index.
PIOC?
Yeah. It's not projected. We measure cost.
How it was versus what it really was projected at. I mean, it has a small margin of error.
It's not a projection.
Fair enough. But for the most part, a lot of the figures that we're looking at are not, we can look at and we can tease out what profits would be, and they don't have to be exact, but it would be something, because even when we're talking about getting data from small buildings, we're also talking about averages, but just something to work on, as opposed to like every single landlord in the city.
So others may disagree. I think that if we talk to underwriters, people at financial institutions or government agencies that take a look at the cash flow of individual buildings, I feel like we will get a sense. So it's not going to be data about existing buildings, but it will be kind of the experience of people who lend based on the cash flow of these buildings to give us a sense of how much for operating costs, how much for financing costs, and what's left over. I think that will be useful. That's something that we really haven't had until Raphael talked about it a little bit last year. And I think if we had more of those models from a variety of sources, it would probably give us better information. That's my instinct. I don't know. Others may disagree.
I think what Lee was saying is, I'm trying to look at what you're saying. Sorry, thank you. But the landlords are always saying, we're losing money, we're going to sell properties because we can't manage building. The income that's coming in, the tenants are not paying, or we're spending too much money in making repairs, is not allowing us to continue to maintain the building. So, therefore, if you are not able to maintain the building, then therefore you need to sell, right? Because you're operating on the negative income. And if you're not showing that, then how can we make assumptions as to whether in reality you're losing money or we're able to say you're making profit, so you continue to maintain the building going forward. I think that's what Leah is saying. We want to be able to see if you're not selling, then you must be making a little profit, not just no profit at all.
And just to add on to that, if we even had some data, it would be helpful, as opposed to working off of, two people testified, so let's use that. Even if we had some kind of tangible data, that would be much more helpful for us to make a determination on things as opposed to, you know, relying on a few testimonies, which may or may not reflect the reality that's, you know, for how much landlords are making, how much they're spending.
Other thoughts on burning questions over the last few years that you've had that you didn't feel like you had full answers to? And then let me just ask again, any thoughts about kind of a dashboard of kind of like early warning signs, given that so much of our data has long lag times? Anything that you'd want to see on such a dashboard, or any ideas you have about what should be on such a dashboard?
Dashboard.
Oh, so just because with all of the changes, there's probably going to be some impact on the housing stock, and there's rhetoric on both sides about it will have a big effect or no, it won't have a big effect. Is there data sources that we could look at that will capture change relatively rapidly? So Alex, for instance, suggested looking at the drop in the sales price of rent-stabilized buildings or rent-stabilized or buildings with lots of rent-stabilized units. And that might tell us something both about kind of the value of the housing stock, but it could also tell us something about whether landlords will have trouble refinancing their mortgages at the end of their mortgage terms. So things like that may just kind of give us an early warning sign so we're not relying on anecdotal testimony.
Also, maybe a suggestion of having an extra, a daytime hearing, so, and possibly schedule it not just for tenant testimony, but for owner testimony, so we can maybe get more owners in here so you can ask questions. I will say that I think coming to the evening open, when we allow the public to testify, is, in my opinion, I think a little intimidating for many owners to come, because they're so outnumbered, and it's so loud, and it's, you know, and that's what it's meant to be, that's fine, but I think maybe if we maybe even had it here and had scheduled people so the rest of the members could ask questions. I mean, no owner is opening up their tax returns to show you exactly what profits they make. I don't think that's a reasonable question to even ask.
Okay,
No. I understand that you have questions and you're not asking specific numbers, but nobody is going to, in my opinion, show you their tax returns. The president doesn't show you his tax returns.
Really?
The owners are not going to do that. But I think that possibly an extra daytime hearing where people can schedule, and maybe more owners would be willing to come testify.
Yeah, I just want to quickly.
I ask that people be quiet as they're watching this hearing, and so that we can hear each other speak and try to come to good decisions for the city. Thank you.
Structure where your data is coming from. Yeah.
So just two things. Because I think it's a different conversation about the data, and it's one just about the atmosphere. I think that if the ask, because tenants are asking for things, landlords are asking for things, I think if landlords are asking for higher rent based off of the fact that they're allegedly not making enough or they're spending so much on repairs in buildings, I think it's fair to ask for, to provide information to show that. Because we have so much information about how much rent is, the vacancy of rent-stabilized apartments, but if I don't think that it's a big ask to ask for data, right, from landlords. It's not an invasion of privacy. Invasion of privacy is like, I'm asking for something and I'm not entitled to it. It's one thing if landlords are asking, we want higher rent, and then we say, okay, well, why? Well, because we're spending so much money. Can you show the money? No, that's different. So I'm just saying, I don't think that it's an unfair, right? Especially because, so now I'm going to get into testimony. Testimony is really important to hear. but we're also have to rely on data as well. And it's just a question that comes up all of the time, and it would be helpful to have something, because then we're just sort of saying, oh, well, 2 people came and testified, so that must be it. So that's one thing. And then regarding the atmosphere, we have, I don't know. We have a housing crisis, and I don't think that it's really accurate, right? I don't know deeply how landlords are feeling, so I'm not in someone else's body. But I can tell you that I don't know that it's accurate to neutralize things and say like it's an equal balance, because at the end of the day, there is a housing crisis. A lot of tenants are suffering. A lot of tenants are being pushed out of their apartments. We have a huge issue. I mean, if you try to find a 1-bedroom apartment right now for under $1,200, good luck. But if you're making, $50,000 or under, I mean, it's just really hard. So tenants are coming to testify, and landlords are making money. I mean, it's just a fact. So I don't think that there's an equal. What we're seeing is we're seeing people coming to testify about their livelihoods. And I believe it was last year we even had landlords felt very comfortable. I think one of them, I don't remember his exact words, but he went into going about how a tenant is a single mother and how that's why people shouldn't, that's, the welfare queen trope, and that's why people are stuck in their, they didn't seem shy to me. So I don't know. So I would just say 2 things. I don't think that, I don't think that, it's accurate to say that we only have so little landlords coming because the way that tenants are coming to testify. It could be we only have so few landlords coming because the stakes are lower. They're making enough profits, the stakes are lower for them, and we have hundreds of tenants coming out to testify because their lives are on the line, their livelihoods. So,
Well, I certainly don't disagree with you that the stakes for the individual tenants are higher. I understand that, and I understand there's a lot more numbers of the tenants than there are owners, so I get the numbers. But what I'm saying is that it is an intimidating prospect for people to come into a room, whether it's tenants and landlords, or whether it's one Republican coming in to speak to a Democratic caucus, whatever it is, it's more intimidating even as an owner's representative sometimes to speak in this room or at the hearing. Then, so what you're expecting is a big ask for a lot of owners to come in and to be abused, to have people screaming at them. And I'm not saying that what they're doing is wrong, and I'm not saying that it's not people's lives, because I get it, I understand. But what I'm saying is maybe we can... Okay, and no one in this room knows anything about me, so people should just please keep their comments to themselves. But I think that we might want to, it's a suggestion, make a day where we have more owners come in, and then you can ask your questions about profit and loss and things like that. Because if that's the information you want, you're going to get it from the owners, not from the tenants.
Right, I'm not asking
Right.
from the tenants. I'm asking for
Leah,
data, not
I
testimony.
think though, you have to acknowledge that I gave a 3 or 4 minute speech that not a single word of it was audible by the crowd. You gave a speech that the crowd was whisper silent. So these hearings have gotten to a point where this is not a civilized discussion that's fair for either party. I mean, my presentation could not be heard by you. It could not be heard by any board member on this committee.
So I do want to put this into context. When we had, because we're getting into a different discussion from data, when we had the rent guidelines board hearings years ago, people would come in with drums, both sides would be there, landlords would be there shouting out, tenants would be there shouting out. and that doesn't happen any longer. And I don't think that, I just want to reiterate, I don't think that it's accurate to say we don't have tons of landlords coming out because they're scared, because the few that do come out, they make their points known, and last year we saw it in a disrespectful way. But what we're seeing is, it's at the end of the day, it's a town hall, it's a public hearing. And this is New York City, and we're in the middle of a crisis. So it's like, if you're looking for, if you're looking for, you're not going to have civility when people are like literally being evicted, and it's a crisis. It's an actual crisis. So I don't know that we're ever going to have radio silent anything. It's a public town hall. You mentioned Republican Democrat. If you go to any event, you're going to have people shouting out. I mean, it is what it is. And if you're going to an event where people are greatly affected, you're going to have people shouting out. So I don't think that it is worth, to be honest, our time to go into how our tenants behaving, because honestly, that's tone policing. And people are upset, and that's what we're seeing. If people could afford New York City, and people could find an apartment and stay in their apartment and not have to worry about eviction, we probably would not have many tenants coming and showing their emotion. But what we're seeing is what's going on. And we don't have, and I think the end result of this is we don't have any, none of us in the room can control what someone in the public is doing.
Alex, I thought you were going to make a comment?
Not on this topic.
Oh, could I respond to Patty's concrete suggestions and then to you? So, Patty, I'll just say, and we as a body, we could do whatever we like. We used to, not last year, but previous years, we used to have a meeting that started earlier. It was in Lower Manhattan. Still very few people showed up, very few owners showed up. So we could reconsider, we have 4 meetings scheduled for this year. We could make one that is longer, starts earlier, maybe ends a little earlier. We could consider that. I will tell you, there wasn't really great attendance, but that doesn't mean we can't try it again. And just a second idea, and I'm just brainstorming, but there's a long day on our agenda where tenants can invite a range of advocacy groups and owners can invite a range of advocacy groups. Maybe I'm just thinking out loud, but maybe we could carve out some time for more of a discussion of the way that you were laying it out in terms of owners kind of reporting on their own situation, or ask the owner reps to kind of do that in some kind of more data-oriented way. So those are some responses.
Just going back to the dashboard question,
Yeah.
I just want to reiterate what Patty and Scott suggested about building permit data as something to track. Tenant complaints maybe could be tracked
In real time,
in real
kind of.
time,
Yeah.
to get a sense. Are they going up? Are they going down?
Are those geocoded or are those not?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Or if they're even rent stabilized complaints or not, but it's something that could be an indicator.
Okay.
It'd be great if we could get more current data from the state about the financial performance of the buildings. Right now, there's a 1 or 2 year lag depending on the data. I don't know if it's possible to.
If they could give us preliminary data.
Yeah, sooner.
Do you know if they can do that?
You're talking state or city? The
Don't-
RPIs are city.
City, and the other is, okay, it could be the city. But anyway, there's a
Yeah, I don't think
significant
the state
lag
has
right now.
Data about
Okay,
expense
I'm
for
sorry.
owners,
It'd be the
but
city
it's
then.
The RPIs, that's based on a law that, in
Okay.
the reporting time.
I'm sorry, the
that
city
would have
then.
to be changed.
The law would have to be changed?
But,
Yeah, in order for earlier reporting.
when is the landlord's reporting date, and when do we get that data?
So generally, it's due, I believe, July, is it June 30th or July 30th? June 30th.
And then we kind of get it from
But,
them.
It's data from the previous calendar year, but it's reported as of June 30th.
So there's a 6-month
So,
lag from when they get
and
it.
then when we get the data, which is usually November or so, because there's filings that they,
So there's like an 11-month
yeah, whatever,
lag.
the lag time between when owners are required to file, and then we get the data, and so it's not going to change the data anyway. So we usually get it,
But I just wonder.
finalized by end of January and into February.
So I just wonder, just kind of brainstorming along what Alex is saying is, like, as soon as you got the data, or if they were able to give us some preliminary data, is there like one particular question that would be really useful to have answered that you could answer early? But that won't affect our.
It doesn't affect our
us,
vote.
because
yeah.
our vote is so much later.
The
yeah.
data that we present to you is still going to be the same
The
time
most recent data, yeah,
it's
so,
the same
yeah.
recent data. So, but I don't know if there was some talk about it. I mean, they already changed it. It used to be September 1st. They moved it to June 30th. So
aligning.
that was about 5 or 6 years ago. I don't know. The reporting date was moved closer to the data, but I'm not sure if there's any movement to move it any earlier.
Okay. Other thoughts on the dashboard? All right, so should we move to the third item on the agenda? And I'm going to just, Patty asked that we put this on the agenda, so I'm going to turn it over to her.
So I wanted to talk about vacancy increases. I understand that most of the issue is tenants in place and the guideline increases, which I get. And I know that the state has stopped the state-ordered vacancy increase, so there's no more 20% if you get a vacancy, or less if it's a 1 year. But when the rent laws came out, we didn't have much time really between when the rent laws came out and our final vote. And what I'm questioning is whether, I understand that the rent law prevents us from issuing a vacancy increase, but whether the 1 or 2 year guidelines can be taken when an apartment becomes vacant. Because if you look at it, and I'm sorry I did not make copies for everybody because I ran out of my office last night, but I will give this around. The new rent stabilized rider, the new lease rider that was issued by DHCR on September of 2019, after the new rent laws came into effect. For the vacancy lease rent calculation, the first number 1 is the previous legal rent. You fill that in, and then it says the guideline increase based on the 1 or 2 year lease. So this indicates that owners can take the 1 and 2 year guideline when they get a vacancy. And vacancies are important. Vacancy increases are important. Forget whether you're going to argue whether the 20% was ridiculous or not, but in previous years, before 1997, before we had a state vacancy increase, the guideline board always gave a vacancy increase. And that is to help the owners prepare the apartment if new... So it's very important to prepare the apartment for the new tenant, to fix up whatever needs to be fixed up. There are new laws about allergens and things that owners must do every time an apartment becomes vacant, and all these things are a cost. Everything is a cost. And when the legislature stopped the vacancy increase, I don't think they were stopping the 20%, the 18%. I get that, but I don't think that there was any intention that there should be 0 continuously. So I would like to discuss that. I have a letter here that I would like to read into the record, which came from the Rent Stabilization Association, and it states this: I urge you to raise an issue of great significance to property owners at the Rent Guideline Board meeting scheduled for October 17th, the ability to apply guideline increases to vacancy increases. As you know, the rent laws of 2019 at first blush appear to have eliminated adjustments for vacancy increases. However, the DHCR has subsequently provided guidance that guideline increases would be applied to vacancy leases in RGB jurisdictions outside New York City and would also apply within New York City pending the approval of the New York City Rent Guideline Board. That's in fact sheet number 26. Given this guideline by DHCR, the New York City Rent Guideline Board should now issue a clarification that the renewal guidelines also apply to vacancy leases. It would be unconscionable to push this matter off to next year's guidelines consideration, creating an economic burden for owners by allowing irrationality to prevail. As you know, the elimination of vacancy increases was perhaps the most egregious example of the overkill that characterized the HTPSA of 2019. It could not possibly have been the intention of the state legislature to ban all rent increases upon vacancy. This would lead to a situation where owners are penalized for vacancy and could result in the absurd situation where an apartment may not be eligible for any rent increases for years at a time. Rather, we believe it was the intention of the legislature to eliminate the statutory 20% vacancy allowance and ban prior measures such as structured vacancy increase based on the year since the last vacancy increase. This interpretation is now supported by the State Housing Agency and is the only rational way to read the language of the new statute. We believe that a clarification of the current New York City rent guideline is called for and absolutely necessary. The timing of the June 14th enactment of the HTPSA and the subsequent June 25th RGB vote left no time for the RGB to consider the consequences of eliminating the vacancy increase. The proposed and final guidelines were largely considered in the context of an existing 20% vacancy allowance and a history of guideline orders in which lower renewal guidelines were partly justified by an additional rent adjustment available upon vacancy. Nor should such a clarification require another public hearing process. The RGB would not be altering the approved guideline in any way, but would merely be allowing the application of the guidelines to vacancy and renewal leases equally, consistent with DHCR's interpretation. The RGB should be committed to protecting the housing stock. The housing stock will undoubtedly suffer without the broad applicability of the already meager rent guidelines to both renewal and vacancy leases. We trust that the RGB will view the requested clarification favorably in the execution of its duties. So I'm just going to pass this around just so you all see. This is DHCR's new rent stabilization lease rider, which gets attached to all leases. So, and I circled the.
So,
So let's say someone, excuse my ignorance, right? If someone is in a $1,000 a month apartment and I leave, right? The next, and you rent it out the next month. In New York City, they ain't gonna take me 1 Thursday to rent out an apartment, right? What does, right now, what the law says the new rent, our rent guide is for 2 years, 2 year renewal for this year is what?
the vacancy increases are where,
Just the renewal lease is what, 2%?
1.5 and
1.5.
1.5 and 2.5.
Do the new tenant get do 1.5%?
No, the new tenant would get nothing.
So the new tenant signs the same 2,000?
Correct. But DHCR is interpreting that the new tenant gets the 2,000 plus the 1.5 or 2.5, depending whether the new tenant takes a 1-year lease or a 2-year lease.
so they're already, so first of all, I don't think that it's this board's role to circumvent the new law.
I'm not intending to circumvent. I'm just pointing out how DHCR is interpreting the new law and DHCR is permitting it.
I don't think that it's this board's role to circumvent the new law. I will say that the new laws, the new rent laws, are already being, I have a question, the new rent laws are already being challenged in litigation.
Yes.
So I'm curious to know why that's not being brought, which I believe it already is being brought up there, why this board would have the authority to not wait for whatever legal outcome that case will have. We don't have the authority to, if it's already being challenged in litigation, and I don't even think DHCR is one of the parties challenging it. I believe it's just the landlord group. So that's one thing. Why would we, as a separate board, make a determination when it's already pending litigation on the same issue? I just think just on that alone, we don't have the authority to say for next year or for this coming year that, we're going to have vacancy increases.
Okay, so, well, first I'm just going to respond. DHCR would not challenge the new rent laws because DHCR is an agency and they're not.
It's not an amicus, it's not a party, it's not,
But putting that aside, there are various challenges to the new rent laws, which will probably take years to be decided, so that's one thing. But the second thing, it is our job to make this decision. We're not necessarily taking it on, that's our job. And the state agency is interpreting it that you are permitted to take it. So I would just like something, I'm proposing that we just not change anything. Obviously, we already, our 1.5 and 2.5 is already decided. Just that we maybe issue something that says DHCR already has a rider that says owners can do it. And as long as owners aren't taking more than the 1.5 or 2.5%, that, we agree with that.
I see your point, but this is my point, is that
can you see, can you paper pass that? We don't have.
I can, oh, sure, I'm sorry.
It's all one document.
It's all
so-
one document? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Once you let the cat out of the bag, it's hard to take it back. And if we were to do something like that, and then the lawsuit would go through, right? Then everybody's gonna say, well, from now on, it's gonna be like this. And then all of a sudden, for these number of years that would happen, because you said it'd take years, that we would kind of put our stamp of approval on these increases, and that's what's gonna happen to people. I think there's a lawsuit. I think that the legislature already wrote their law. There's a challenge to that law, and we did not go in for any vacancy increases, and we leave it like that. Let the litigation play itself out.
I understand what you're saying, and I understand your position, but I'm not asking us to vote on a vacancy increase. The law already said we cannot vote, we're not permitted to vote on a vacancy increase. I'm just saying that we should take some position and approve, since DHCR is the state agency that is the one that guides this. They're the agency in charge of this. I understand that there's a separate lawsuit. There are many lawsuits that will be even further ones that are coming. But that if the agency's taking the permission that you're entitled to take it, why should we take a different position?
Okay, I just want to step in and say, we came today to talk about data, okay? And this is a separate conversation that I didn't know.
No, I understand, but it was on the agenda.
It's on it as, what is this apartment loft 51?
That's the guideline increase.
Yeah, we didn't.
Well, I didn't title it. It's on the agenda to speak about.
This is a much more extended conversation, it seems like, and we should really be talking about what we came to talk about, which is data, and not talk about it for 15 minutes. And I want to say, I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about it or that we shouldn't talk about the atmosphere as well. I did say it's not a worthwhile conversation. I think it's complaining about, I think regarding the atmosphere, it's like complaining about baseballs flying in a baseball game. So I don't know about that, but I think this is a much more in-depth conversation that I do think we should table to really have it fleshed out. I will say my opinion is that I don't think that it's fair, even if it is going to take a few years of litigation, to sort of punish tenants of New York City and have them have a vacancy increase, and then later on down the line the courts don't find in that favor. How can we take that back, right? And so
Yes, you can. Of course you could take it back. It's the same thing as if an owner overcharged somebody.
Now, if
they have
I
to
live
refund
here,
the money.
No,
Could we just each speak one at a time, please?
but I just want to say this is not we need to have a conversation about data. I don't feel like that. I just want to point out, I think that that's a much more fleshed out conversation that we should have. And I was under the impression that that's what we would be talking about in large part today. And I understand that this was put on the agenda just as Loft 51, but it's not, it was not at least clarified that we would be talking about whether vacancy increases, whether we have the authority as a board to circumvent the laws and have vacancy increases. I do think that that's a different conversation.
Okay, I have no problem tabling it.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to go to Alex first.
Yeah, a couple of questions. I'm not sure what the significance is of the state. What is the state saying it's going to go ahead and have this as a rider of the lease, or is it asking?
That is New York State's rider that gets attached to every lease right now.
And it's a larger conversation, because I don't interpret it the same way you do.
I'm asking, is the state currently now going to be saying that there is an increase based on it, or is it asking I'm still a little confused, is it asking the RGB for its approval of this? Is it already have it? Also, does the city have, the mayor's office or other units of government have also have a position on this in terms of reopening an order, for example?
I don't know that I'm suggesting the order be reopened, because I'm not suggesting that a vacancy increase be issued, because we're not permitted to issue a vacancy increase pursuant to the law. But I will say that and I understand that you didn't know this was going to come up today, and that to table it, I have no problem discussing it another time. But the reason I want to discuss it is because the state agency issued this document that's attached to leases now, and to me, it's contrary, a little bit contrary to what the law says. So I would like to discuss it with the board and clarify our position here, because if the agency's telling owners to take this increase, owners may be taking it, or should be taking it, or what they're doing, but the document says what it says. It could be interpreted various ways, so I wanted to have a discussion about it. Whether we discuss it today or another time is fine, but I don't want to wait another 6 months to discuss it.
So you're saying that the state has given this, and a landlord can, because of what the DHCR said, could go ahead and do it, and you want us to vote or discuss on saying, oh, yeah, they should?
Well, we can't have a vote today on it.
No, but I'm saying that's what you're asking to discuss. Frankly, if DCR put it that way, and it's contrary to, and there's a lawsuit, I don't want to weigh in on it. Let them, we didn't vote on a vacancy increase. This, in effect, would be a vacancy increase, and let the courts decide that between,
Well, that particular document is not going to come up in the lawsuit. What's coming up in the lawsuit is everything that the law said, which it.
But that is part of. I think that's why I'm. So this is why I'm confused. There's already RSA and other, I think Chip are suing us, suing me, as
Me
well
too.
as suing, and so, sure, we're party to the lawsuit, but it's already something that's being legally challenged. So I'm just saying, aside from the substantive part of it, I'm just saying procedurally, I do not think that we have the authority to make a decision about something that is already being challenged, and there hasn't been a decision by a court on it. And furthermore, I'm saying that we still should be talking about data, that we haven't finished that conversation.
Well, I think you moved on to number 3, so
I think we did.
I thought we were talking about data I thought this was going to be.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is just the third, this is the third item on the agenda. I mean, so let's just talk concretely. What are you suggesting, Patty?
I'm suggesting that we have a discussion about DHCR's rider that says that owners are permitted to use the 1.5% and 2.5% increases, not only on renewal leases, but on a vacancy.
Which page are you referring? Just
I
the circle
just,
right here?
yeah, the circle.
Okay, so
Now, and I understand that people here may not have been prepared to have that discussion today, and that's fine. But you asked me to say what I wanted to discuss, and that's what I wanted to discuss. And I can certainly make copies of that and send it around.
So is this rider currently being used?
Yes.
So right now, if there's a vacancy, a landlord can raise the rent for a vacant unit by the amount for a,
That's indicated on that rider.
okay. So,
Right, it says how it's interpreted, right? How are you going to interpret that, right? So I guess you would have to get a legal advice. How are we going to interpret this, right? How do we move forward? Is this something that we can do, or we cannot
Right, so
do.
it's not, I don't want another vote on the guidelines, because we
Yeah.
can't do that.
Just,
But we can interpret the guidelines and say that the state agencies say you can use the 1.5% and 2.5%. It's not a separate vacancy increase, that it just should be used when you sign a 1 or 2 year vacancy lease.
I'm not interpreting this as saying, it's not clear cut
I understand.
as what you're saying. I actually don't interpret it at all, the way you're saying it. And I'm not being biased, that all it says is the guideline increase can only be taken once per guideline year. Okay. So I don't, so just on the substance of it, it's not something that where you read it, I was expecting to read it and it say, DHCR issues a decision that the rent guidelines, that there can be a vacancy increase. It's not clear cut that way. And I don't think that, so I think there's two different issues. There's procedurally, if we have the authority to make this determination when it's already being litigated, like if us as a board, and then substantively, if DHCR is even making this determination that that the guidelines can be increased as a vacancy increase, and I don't believe that this is what it says.
So Leah, I'm not taking a position on much of this at all. I'm not taking a position, but I just want to say that HCR also has a fact sheet number 5, that says, however, if authorized by the board, a 1 or 2 year lease guideline may be applied and added to the previous tenant's legal rent. So that's at least a forward-looking statement. And again, it's just from a fact sheet from HCR.
And that's still ambiguous because it's not referring, it's still ambiguous. It's not clear cut.
I don't think that fact sheet's ambiguous. I think the writing over there is more ambiguous than the fact sheet.
So what is the proposal that,
Can we have another meeting so we could discuss it?
We could do that. I think
that would be much better than discussing it
the
today.
part of the conversation that we're missing is that our order says that our guideline increases apply to renewal leases. That's the language.
As opposed to new
As opposed to rent stabilized leases.
So there's a lot, I mean, I think
And
like
that-
Leah says,
that
there's
would
a
be
lot
the-
of legal ambiguity surrounding this. At a minimum,
That's
I think
another
even
issue.
Patty would agree that there's a lot of legal ambiguity surrounding this.
I think there's so many discussions, honestly, that there are only so many meetings that we have, and we have to make this very important determination that affects millions of New Yorkers. I really think that we need to be focusing on the raw issues and not go down a rabbit hole of something that even if who is interpreting what, it's not in our wheelhouse. We need to be discussing data. We need to be discussing how much profits landlords are making. We need to be discussing how many tenants are affected. What is the vacancy rate for rent stabilized apartments?
But that's just part of the discussion.
As I said, it's a rabbit hole. I'll call it a rabbit hole. It's a rabbit hole. It's,
For the lawyers to take a look at it and give us an opinion?
They've been looking at things, yeah. So Patty's proposing that we add a meeting to the agenda.
Or at least that you discuss it with the legal department,
Okay, all
something,
right.
because here's a fact sheet and a rider prepared by DHCR, the state agency, after the issuance of the new law, which affects many owners.
So let me make a suggestion. Let Andrew and me speak to the law department, and then we'll communicate to the board by email and get back to you with some thoughts. Is that reasonable?
Well, yes, some thoughts, but again, I don't think that we should be making a determination. We're not going to make right? And so.
We're definitely not making any determination today.
Not today.
Yeah, at a minimum.
And not by your opinion, you're just sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, we're gonna consult and get back to you all. Is that reasonable? Is that reasonable?
And in the meantime, I'll send around the stabilized lease letter to the board members.
Where it's coming from.
Okay. All right. Any new business? Okay, hearing none, I call this meeting to an end.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I need to.
Motion to adjourn.
Can I have a motion to adjourn? I'm sorry. Is that good enough?
Somebody give a motion to
And a
adjourn.
motion, all right, and a second.
Second?
All right, thank you all.
All right.
Thanks to everyone for coming.